of the gospel truth. Today I'm continuing to teach through the book of Romans, and I tell you, this has been powerful. These truths are the foundation of our Christian faith. And sad to say, the average Christian today is not well established in the true gospel. I've been teaching on this for a week and a half, and I believe, and I've said this, that what is being taught in most churches today is not the true gospel. They will say it's the gospel, but the gospel releases power. It says in Romans chapter 1, verse 16, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of God because it is the power of God unto salvation. It releases power when you get the gospel. And the average person today who is born again and is headed to heaven is not having the power of God operating in their life because they haven't heard the true gospel. There is a false gospel. There's people that are talking about things, but they're condemning people and putting requirements on them, regulations, laws, rules, and rituals that actually diminish the power of God in their life. I've already used this verse over in Galatians chapter 5, but it says, Christ is become of none effect unto you, whosoever of you are justified by the law. And that's what a lot of Christians are being taught today, that you have to be justified by your actions, not by faith in what Jesus did for you. You know, the word justified is a religious term, but here's the simple layman's definition that'll help you to remember the heart of what it's talking about. The word justified means just as if I'd never sinned. And you are justified, just as if I'd never sinned, by faith in Jesus and what He did, and not by your own performance. If you are being taught that you have to be holy and earn and be worthy of God answering your prayer and moving in your life, then Christ has become of none effect unto you. You are justified by your works instead of by Christ's works. And that's where a lot of people are missing it. So I've already been dealing with this for quite a while. We're now in Romans chapter 3, and yesterday I read verses 19 and 20 that shows that the law was given to take away your excuses, to stop your mouth from making excuses and saying, you don't understand. It's because they treated me this way is the reason I am this way. No, the law puts responsibility on you. You are responsible for your own actions, and it makes you guilty before God in Romans chapter 19. Verse 20 says, therefore by the deeds of the law there shall no flesh be justified, again, just as if I'd never sinned, in His sight, for by the law is the knowledge of sin. The law only focuses your attention upon sin, upon yourself. If you are a self-conscious person, if you are constantly focused on all of the things that you have to do in order to succeed, you're living under the law. When you are under the gospel, it will focus your attention on what Jesus has done for you. And you will have actions, but they will be the byproduct. It'll be like the caboose on the train that just follows along because of all of the great things that God has done. Therefore, I'm going to read the Bible, not in order to get God to bless me, but because God has already blessed me, and I want to read the Bible and find out what all of these things are. I'm doing it out of joy, not out of debt, not out of obligation. I go to church not in order to appease an angry God, but because I want to assemble with people that I love, and I want to hear people talk about God and give me the good news of the gospel. See, there are people that are doing the right things. They're reading the Bible, they're going to church, they're paying their tithes, but if you do it in order to appease God and to earn His favor in your life, then you're under the law. And the law will only focus on what you haven't done. It'll never give you a compliment about what you have done. The law will actually depress you. It will cause guilt, is what it says in verse 19. It'll focus your attention on sins, what it says in verse 21 or verse 20. Verse 21 says, but now the righteousness of God without the law is manifested, being witnessed by the law and the prophets. Notice it says the righteousness of God, not your righteousness. See, most people are going about to establish their own righteousness. You know, I'll get to this eventually, but let me just flip over and read this. Paul said in Romans chapter 10, verse 1, brethren, my heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is that they might be saved. For I bear them record that they have a zeal of God, but not according to knowledge. For they, being ignorant of God's righteousness, and going about to establish their own righteousness, have not submitted themselves unto the righteousness of God. For Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to every one that believeth. Man, those are radical statements. They being ignorant of God's righteousness, a righteousness that comes by faith. They're ignorant of faith righteousness. They're going about to establish self-righteousness, and they have not submitted themselves unto the righteousness of God. You can't be self-righteous and faith-righteous at the same time. Your faith has to be in what God did for you. And this is what it's saying in Romans chapter 3, that the righteousness of God, not your righteousness, but the righteousness of God is manifest, being witnessed by the law and the prophets. In other words, the Old Testament prophesied that all of this is coming. It's not like God gave the law and that didn't work, so He decided He'd try something new, and He gave the gospel in the New Testament relationship with God. No, the law was a temporary measure. Galatians chapter 3, the law was like a schoolmaster to bring us unto Christ. But once we're under Christ, we aren't under this Old Testament law anymore. The Old Testament law prophesied about the New Testament grace and prophesied the end of itself. Man, those are radical statements, but this is what it's saying right here. The righteousness of God, which is by faith. The righteousness of God, not your righteousness, but the righteousness of God. You know, I've been into many churches, and they typically take the preacher into a back room and they pray before, you go out for the service and stuff. And I've been in many churches where they just prayed, "Oh God, make me righteous. Oh God, make me righteous." And I don't say anything because it's just, they wouldn't even understand what I was talking about. But I want to say, you ought to get born again. When you get born again, you become the righteousness of God. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 24 says, "Put on the new man, which after God is created in righteousness and true holiness." You aren't becoming righteous. You aren't striving for righteousness. You don't pray and ask God to make you righteous. You receive salvation, and instantly your spirit is created righteous and truly holy. Boy, what I've said right there is profound, and the vast majority of people do not understand or agree with what I'm saying. If that is a revelation to you, if that doesn't bless you, you need to get my teaching on spirit, soul, and body. I've got that in book form, CD, DVD, and all kinds of ways, but you need to get that and understand it's when you get born again, you become a new person in your spirit, and you are created righteous and truly holy, implying that there is false holiness. You know what false holiness is? It's all of your things that you do. Now you need two types of righteousness. We talked about that in Romans chapter 10. He says, "They being ignorant of God's righteousness and going about to establish their own righteousness have not submitted themselves unto the righteousness which is of God by faith." There are two types of righteousness. The only one that does any good in your relationship with God is the righteousness of Jesus that is given to you as a free gift at salvation. And that faith righteousness is the only righteousness that counts between you and God. But you need a self-righteousness, or you need to do what's right in your actions, not to please God. He's pleased with you through Jesus, and He gives you Jesus' righteousness. You are born again in righteousness and true holiness, Ephesians 4:24, the moment you get born again. So as far as God's concerned, you are righteous in His sight because God is a spirit. John chapter 4, verse 24 says God is a spirit, and those who worship Him must worship Him in spirit and in truth. And He sees you in the spirit, and in the spirit you are righteous. So God is pleased with you based on faith righteousness. But then you do need a self-righteousness in order to get along with people. If you go out and rob and steal and murder and lie and don't work a good job and stuff, don't do a good job you don't do a full day's work at your job, it's going to cost you. You'll get fired. You could get arrested for robbing a bank, for breaking the speed limit. You need to maintain a self-righteousness to stay out of trouble and to get along with people. But when it comes to God, self-righteousness is as a filthy rag. Isaiah I think that's chapter 64, verse 6. All of our righteousness is like filthy rags. That's talking about self-righteousness. You need a self-righteousness to relate to other people. But when it comes to relating to God, it's only the righteousness of God that counts. And so that's what this is saying in verse 22. What we've received is even the righteousness of God, which is by faith of Jesus Christ, unto all and upon all them that believe. For there is no difference, for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God, being justified freely by His grace through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. You know, we often take this 23rd verse out of context, and I even do this and make a point of saying that there is none righteous, no, not one. And that is a true statement. But in its context, what he's saying is that it's the righteousness of God that makes us in right standing with Him. You can't be accepted by God based on your good works. It's impossible, because all of us have sinned and come short of the glory of God, and in the same way that all of us have become sinners, we have all been made righteous through what Jesus has done. The only qualification on that, Ephesians 2:8 says you have to receive grace by faith. You're saved by grace through faith. God's grace has appeared unto all men. Titus chapter 2, verse 11. God's grace is the same for every person that's ever lived. Hitler had just as much grace bestowed towards him for salvation as you and I have. But as far as we know, Hitler never received that salvation. He rejected it. And it didn't profit him because it wasn't mixed with faith. We have to have it mixed with faith. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 2 says, the word preached unto them did not profit them, not being mixed with faith in them that heard it. You have to put faith in God's grace. But by grace, God has dealt with every single person's sins. You know, if you're watching this and if you have never really committed your life to the Lord and you just think, well, I'm too far gone, I've done too much, you don't understand. No, God, by grace, has already paid for your sins. You don't have to pray and say, oh God, will you forgive me of my sins? I ask you to forgive me. You don't have to ask. He's already paid the price. He's already made the payment. It's a done deal. Now, it's not an automatic thing that it's going to benefit you until you receive it. But you don't have to ask, will He do it? No, He's already done it. It's will you receive it? Will you make Jesus your Lord? Will you receive what He said? And this is not only applied to your initial being born again, getting your sins forgiven so that you won't die and go to hell, but instead go to heaven. But this is also true of healing, deliverance, joy, peace, prosperity, everything. God has already provided everything that you will ever need. It's a done deal, and you don't have to do something to earn it. You just have to believe and receive. And that's all there is to it. Man, that's powerful. We have all sinned and come short of the glory of God, and likewise we have all been justified freely by His grace through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. As long as you put faith in that, you do have to believe in order to receive. If you doubt, you'll do without. In verse 25, it says, whom God has set forth to be a propitiation, and the word propitiation here means atoning sacrifice. God set Jesus forth to be an atoning sacrifice through faith in His blood to declare His righteousness for the remission of sins that are past through the forbearance of God. And then in verse 26, to declare, I say at this time, His righteousness. The emphasis is that it is not your righteousness, it's not your good works that make you in right standing, righteous with God. It's Jesus' good works. You have Jesus, all of His good works imputed unto you. Man, there's just so many scriptures. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, Galatians chapter 3. There's many scriptures that make this same point. And yet the average religious person today has missed this, and they think that somehow or another they become in right standing with God through all of the things that they do. No, you cannot ever ever be accepted with God on the basis of your goodness. Your goodness might be better than my goodness, but who wants to be the best sinner that was ever sent to hell? None of us deserve the goodness of God. It's His righteousness. It's what Jesus did for us, and all I have to do to receive it is to just believe and accept the goodness, the grace, this nearly too good to be true news about how everything that God is and everything that God has is available to me on an unearned, undeserved basis just simply by faith. And when I do that, then His righteousness gets imputed unto me. Man, that is powerful. It says over in 1 Corinthians chapter 1 that, I believe it's verse 30, that Jesus is made unto us wisdom and righteousness and sanctification and redemption. Jesus is my righteousness. You know, I've heard this little joke about a person that went to heaven, you know, and they're standing there in front of God, and here's a Muslim and a Buddhist and a religious Christian and all of this. And if the Lord was to come up to you and say, what makes you worthy to enter into heaven? How would you respond? Well, you know, the Muslim might say, well, I practiced jihad and I killed the infidels. And so they believe that somehow or another that earns them favor with God. And you might have, you know, the Buddhists say, well, I shaved my head and I put on a saffron robe and I begged and I denied myself and all of these kind of things. And if they give those answers, that is not salvation. That doesn't earn them a relationship with God. And to most Christians, that's pretty obvious. But did you know that a lot of Christians, if an angel was to walk up to them and say, what makes you worthy? Many Christians would point to their church attendance, to their giving record, to the fact that they stayed married to the same woman, that they tried to do what was right. That is the wrong answer, just the same as a Muslim saying, I practiced jihad, or a Buddhist saying, I shaved my head and begged and denied myself. If you point to any of the things you do as justification for God loving you and accepting you, then you are not operating in the gospel. Your faith isn't in Jesus, it's in yourself. And self-righteousness is useless. Useless. It's like a filthy rag when it comes to relating to God. That's again Isaiah chapter 64 and verse 6. All of our righteousness is like filthy rags. And if you look that up in the Hebrew, it's literally talking about a menstrual cloth. If you are trusting in your own goodness, it's like a filthy rag, a menstrual cloth. It is defiled. It is ungodly. It is useless when it comes to relating to God. This right here says that God put Jesus as a sacrifice, a propitiation, atoning sacrifice through faith in His blood to declare His righteousness for the remission of sins that are passed through the forbearance of God. To declare, I say at this time, His righteousness, that He might be just and the justifier of him which believeth in Jesus. Where is boasting then? If you understand what we're talking about, and it's not your good works, all you do is just receive what Jesus has already done, and the thing that makes you righteous in the sight of God is what Jesus did, not what you do. If you understand this, it takes away boasting. That's what he's saying. Where is boasting then? It is excluded. By what law of works? Nay, but by the law of faith. You can tell if a person is operating in grace or if they're working in law and works. Because if they are under a law performance-based mentality, then when things go good, they will take credit for it. You know, we're just now entering into my 50th year of ministry, and my staff, we're going to have a party and get together, and they're going to produce a little video that just goes back and shows the faithfulness of God. And I was just talking to my media director just a few minutes ago before these programs, and I'm wanting to see what he's doing, because I said, look, I want to make sure that this is presented not as a pat on the back to me, but just thankfulness to God for what He's done. And we got to talking about this very thing, that when you understand grace, man, there's nothing that has happened in my life that I deserve credit for. It's God that has done everything. And man, I have failed God 100 times, and yet He has still been good to me, and I want to make sure that God gets the credit for it. See, when you understand grace, this is the way it is. Again, 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 7 says, what do you have that you didn't receive? And if you've received it, then why are you boasting as if you didn't receive it, as if somehow or another you earned this, as it was some great merit or ability of your own? No, the boasting is excluded once you understand grace. Did you know that these verses right here caused the Reformation in the 1500s? Martin Luther was a priest in the Catholic Church. He was seeking God, and he was trying to perform and do all of these things. And he was actually in the Vatican, climbing up steps on his knees, going through all of these rituals, and just feeling like this can't be it. It's got to be more than this. And the Lord reminded him of these scriptures, that it's His righteousness, that boasting is excluded when you understand grace. And then verse 28 says, therefore we conclude that a man is justified by faith without the deeds of the law, without having to climb up the steps on your knees and say all of these Hail Marys and Our Fathers and stuff. And Martin Luther had the Lord remind him of these scriptures. He had been studying them. He got a revelation. He went back and wrote his thesis, nailed them to the church door, and started the Protestant Reformation that has literally changed the world. And you know what? These verses are what did it. Man, this is so powerful. This has literally changed the world. This is awesome. And I know that God has had you tune into this program because you likewise need a revelation of the true gospel, that it's not based on your goodness. It's not, you don't have to earn the things of God. This isn't to say that you don't do what's right, but you do what's right because first of all, you love God and you want to do what's right. But secondly, you do it to stop Satan from gaining inroad into your life. But you do not have to live up to a standard to please God. Jesus did that for you, and He offers right standing, righteousness with God, His righteousness to you as a gift. You receive the gift of righteousness, is what it goes on to say in Romans chapter 5. We will be getting to those verses pretty soon. So in verse 29 it says, is He the God of the Jews only? Is He not also of the Gentiles? Yes, of the Gentiles also, seeing it is one God which shall justify the circumcision by faith and the uncircumcision through faith. Do we then make void the law through faith? God forbid, yea, we establish the law. The grace of God doesn't do away with the law, it establishes the law. But the law was never given to give you salvation. It was given to show you your need for salvation.